Flight attendant kicks woman off plane, realizes too late she's the CEO's wife. Welcome to a story that delves into the hidden dimensions of appearances, power, and the swift hand of karma. We begin at John F. Kennedy International Airport, where a flight attendant's impatience and a misunderstanding lead to a shocking chain of events. Our protagonist, pushed to the edge by personal troubles, finds an unexpected adversary in a seemingly ordinary traveler, unaware of the monumental secret she carries. From tense standoffs and whispered exchanges to surprising alliances, every chapter of this tale will remind us that we never truly know who sits beside us or whom we risk offending. Prepare for drama, suspense, and life-changing revelations at 35,000 feet. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Genevieve Davis pinched the bridge of her nose as she stood in line at Terminal 4, Starbucks latte in hand. The overhead announcements declared delays for multiple flights, and the crowd in the concourse bustled with restless energy. Genevieve was supposed to report for her pre-flight briefing at Gate B36 in half an hour, but she was running behind her earlier train had stalled, leaving her in a whirlwind of stress. Normally composed and polite, she felt the weight of a restless night on her shoulders, a tense phone call with her mother, a last-minute rent increase from her landlord, and a throbbing headache that pulsed just behind her eyes. She sucked in a deep breath of the coffee's aroma, hoping it would lend her some focus. Working for the fictional airline Sky Pacific had been Genevieve's dream for years. She had built a spotless reputation over her 5-year career, known among colleagues for her calm professionalism. This morning, however, threatened to undo that carefully cultivated composure. Each step across the polished airport tiles felt a little heavier than usual. As she wove through the crowd, her phone buzzed. It was another notification about a gate change, meaning she had to hustle even faster. When she finally reached the Sky Pacific crew lounge, she was out of breath. Her manager, a stern-eyed man named Terence Locke, was already setting out the flight plan. "Cutting it close, Miss Davis," he said, voice devoid of humor. She bowed her head in apology, muttering something about train delays. He nodded brusquely, then launched into the specifics. The flight to Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, was fully booked. The flight time was 6 hours, and they'd be using a Boeing 757, known for its slim aisles and limited overhead bin space. It was peak travel season. Tensions would already be high. The pre-flight briefing was routine enough. Emergency procedures, passenger count, special notes regarding meal preferences, and VIP watch lists. Genevieve listened, but found her thoughts drifting. She was aware that some of her colleagues eyed her with mild curiosity. Her lateness was unusual, but no one spoke up. "One last item," Terence said, scanning his tablet. "We have a high-level corporate traveler on board today, the spouse of a CEO, Alexander Knight, who recently joined our board of investors. The name is M. Knight. We need to ensure their flight experience is smooth and pleasant. No fiascos, people." Genevieve jotted a quick note. M. Knight Saip. She tried to dispel her worries and return to the confident flight attendant persona that had served her well for half a decade. Looking over at her fellow attendants, Adam, Serena, and Fiona, she nodded resolutely. This was just another flight, she told herself. She had handled celebrities and business moguls before, and yet fate often strikes when you least expect it. With the briefing concluded, Genevieve and the others headed to the aircraft. The Boeing 757, gleaming under the airport's fluorescent lighting, was already swarmed by baggage handlers and catering teams. Genevieve took a moment to do her standard checks, overhead compartments latched, safety cards in pockets, emergency equipment in place. She took pride in her thoroughness. If anything, she wanted to reclaim her day by excelling in her tasks. Boarding began with the usual swirl of passengers, each toting an array of carry-ons. The first-class section filled quickly, with business travelers already flipping open laptops or sipping champagne. The economy cabin gradually took shape with families corralling children, couples squabbling over seats, and individuals rummaging for overhead space. Genevieve maintained a polite smile, ensuring seat assignments were correct and that no one blocked the aisle too long. Midway through the boarding process, a woman wearing a casual blue cardigan and fitted jeans approached the front. She appeared composed, her dark hair swept back in a low ponytail and her eyes scanning her boarding pass in mild confusion. "Excuse me," she asked softly, "is this the right row for 2D? Genevieve glanced at the pass. 2D is behind the partition. "Yes," she replied. "Are you sure it's 2D, not 2C? The card indeed said 2D, but the passenger seat map looked unusual. "It might be a glitch," Genevieve said, "but go ahead and sit. We'll sort it out if needed." The woman smiled, a bit uncertain. "All right, thank you." She slid past Genevieve into the wide first-class seat, placing a small, classy handbag under the seat in front of her. Something about her demeanor exuded quiet confidence, as though she was used to traveling but never flaunted it. Genevieve's day had been so chaotic that she didn't fully register the name on the pass, Mia Knight. With so many passengers and seat details swirling around, she simply ushered the next group forward, never once connecting M-Kite from the briefing to the woman in the seat near the window. The doors closed, and the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Genevieve led the safety demonstration, her voice clear and steady over the intercom. The plane taxied to the runway, and soon they were airborne, climbing into the blue morning sky. Once the seatbelt sign flicked off, Genevieve and her fellow attendants started preparing for the in-flight service. As she rolled the drink cart through first class, she noticed the woman in 2D was glancing at her phone, seemingly uneasy about something. Genevieve approached with a practiced smile. "May I get you something to drink to start the flight off right?" Her tone was professional, though her nerves still felt a bit frayed from the morning's rush. "Just water, please," the passenger responded, returning a polite smile. "Also, I think there might be a mistake with my seat. I was expecting to be next to my husband in 2C, but someone else is sitting there." Genevieve nodded. "We'll take a look at the seating chart." She handed over the water. "What's your husband's name?" "Alexander Knight," the woman said softly. "He was supposed to be next to me." That name should have struck Genevieve like lightning, but in the hustle of the moment, her mind was a tangled mess. She had dealt with so many seat swaps over the years that she only recognized Knight as vaguely familiar. "Let me see if we can resolve this. Meanwhile, please enjoy your water." The passenger thanked her. Genevieve moved to the galley, rummaging for the manifest. But the computer system was lagging, and she had meal orders to coordinate. She told herself she'd handle the seat mix-up after distributing drinks in the rest of first class. She fully intended to help, but one passenger insisted on a special cocktail and another demanded an extra blanket. Juggling these requests, she inadvertently forgot about the seat problem. 2 hours into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked on. A minor bout of turbulence rattled the plane. Genevieve hurried to secure the galley, ensuring coffee pots and trays wouldn't slide. The plane rocked again, more firmly, as the captain's voice came over the speakers, advising everyone to remain seated and fasten belts. As the turbulence subsided, Genevieve walked through the cabin to check for compliance. She found Mia in 2D clutching her armrest. Concerned, Genevieve leaned closer. "Are you all right, ma'am? Do you get anxious in turbulence?" Mia forced a tight-lipped smile. "A bit. Usually my husband calms me down, but we got separated. I asked about it earlier, but I think you've been busy. Genevieve glanced apologetically at the seat across the aisle occupied by a tall man in a wrinkled suit who was already dozing. Right, she murmured, remembering the promised seat swap. I'll see what I can do. If he's willing to move, we can accommodate you both, or we can check for open seats up here. But just as she finished speaking, Terence's voice crackled through the intercom. Genevieve, we need you in the galley. With a sigh, she patted Mia's shoulder. I'll be right back. In the galley, Terence explained they were short on one of the pre-ordered meals in business class, and they needed an attendant to coordinate a last-minute solution. Genevieve was the most experienced at handling dietary constraints. By the time she resolved that crisis and returned to first class, an hour had passed. Mia was gone. A flicker of concern spiked through Genevieve as she scanned the cabin. Then she spotted Mia near the front restroom, leaning against the bulkhead. Her expression was pinched with anxiety, and she was whispering into a phone that she must have switched to airplane mode incorrectly or was using Wi-Fi calling. Genevieve approached, feeling a surge of frustration at the repeated requests from this passenger, though a calmer voice inside her reminded her that it was part of her job. Genevieve tapped Mia's shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am, you really shouldn't be using your phone out here if the seatbelt sign is on." Her tone came out sharper than intended, fueled by the swirl of stress from earlier tasks. "Also, we need you seated for safety." Mia turned, startled. "I'm sorry. My husband said he sent you a text about switching seats, and I was trying to see if there was a quick solution. I don't mean to break rules. I'm just worried." "MAAM, Genevieve said, exhaling. "We have procedures. We can't have passengers ignoring seatbelt signs, especially during turbulence. We'll handle your seat request, but you need to be patient. Now, please return to your seat." Irritation seeped into her voice. She vaguely remembered that night was a name from the morning briefing, but her focus was scattered. Mia obeyed, head lowered. At that moment, the plane lurched again, throwing Genevieve off balance. She stumbled, nearly falling into Mia's lap. Irritated, she regained her footing. "That's exactly why we want you seated," she snapped, half blaming Mia for her own near fall. "Now, buckle up, or I'll have to make a report to the captain." A hush spread through the first-class cabin as a few nearby passengers sensed the tension. Embarrassed and feeling singled out, Mia sank into her seat. Her cheeks flushed with what looked like anger or humiliation. In that moment, Genevieve assumed she was dealing with a difficult passenger. She didn't suspect that this woman was the very VIP she was supposed to treat with utmost care, and that in the next hours her oversight would have devastating consequences. Just as Genevieve spun around to return to the galley, the plane dipped unexpectedly. She lost her footing a second time, this instance more dramatically. In front of several onlookers, she toppled forward, catching herself on the armrest of a passenger's seat. Her ankle twisted in the awkward maneuver, sending a bolt of pain up her leg. Pain and embarrassment flushed her cheeks. She managed to straighten up, ignoring the throbbing in her ankle. A wave of compassion from the passengers enveloped her, but she waved them off, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. Glancing back, she saw Mia looking at her with genuine concern, but Genevieve misinterpreted it as pity. She brushed it off, hobbling toward the galley, where she hissed in pain once she was out of sight. Fiona, another flight attendant, hurried over. "Genevieve, are you all right?" she asked. Seeing Genevieve clutching her ankle, she found an ice pack and pressed it to the swelling. "Let me take over the forward cabin." Swallowing her pride, Genevieve nodded. Immediate karma, she thought bitterly, for snapping at that passenger. She tried to rationalize. She was only firm because turbulence was dangerous, but a nagging sense of guilt told her she'd been unnecessarily harsh. To avoid attention, Genevieve insisted she could manage, but Fiona called Terence. The cabin manager stepped in, instructing Genevieve to sit down in the jump seat for a bit. Meanwhile, Fiona handled first class. Genevieve's frustration mounted. She wanted to prove she was capable of doing her job, but now she was sidelined, physically hurt and emotionally rattled. As the flight approached the halfway mark, Fiona successfully arranged for the dozing man in 2C to move to a vacant seat in row 6, granting Mia and her husband Alexander a chance to sit together. Genevieve, from her vantage point at the galley entrance, watched Mia gather her belongings. Suddenly, a tall, well-dressed man in business attire approached from the business class section and took the newly vacated seat 2C. He placed a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. "You okay?" the man asked, voice laced with concern. Mia nodded, whispering something about the turbulence and a misunderstanding with the flight attendant. Genevieve saw them exchange a brief hug. That must be her husband, Genevieve realized. Something about his face, or maybe the mention of Knight, nudged at her memory. She glimpsed the name Alexander Knight embroidered on the corner of his laptop case, which he tucked into the seat pocket. The puzzle pieces started to align in her mind. If this was Alexander Knight, newly affiliated with Sky Pacific's board, then Mia Knight had to be the M. Knight from the morning's briefing. A pit formed in Genevieve's stomach. Heat burned in her chest as she recalled Terence's caution about handling a CEO's spouse with the utmost grace. She'd violated every courtesy in the book, basically ordering Mia Knight around, snapping at her and ignoring her seat concerns. Even if she tried to rectify the situation, it might be too late. Alexander's protective demeanor suggested he wouldn't take kindly to his wife being mistreated. Determined to salvage the situation, Genevieve limped down the aisle, her ankle still tender. The seatbelt sign was off for the moment, and she took the opportunity to approach the couple. Summoning her best professional tone, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Knight, Mrs. Knight, I apologize for any confusion earlier about your seat assignments," she began. Mia looked up, her expression tinged with hurt. Before Genevieve could finish, Alexander spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, there was quite a bit of confusion and, it seems, some disrespect." He glanced at his wife, who lowered her gaze. "We appreciate Fiona fixing the issue, but I'd like to know where the misunderstanding came from." Genevieve felt a flush of shame color her cheeks. "It was a hectic morning, and I didn't realize. I'm sorry, Mr. Knight, Miss S. Knight." She offered a small bow. "I assure you it wasn't personal. The turbulence and a seat mix up. I allowed my frustration to come through, which was unprofessional." Mia gave a small nod, accepting the apology at face value, but her eyes betrayed ongoing hurt. Alexander Knight's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, let's hope the rest of the flight goes more smoothly. This is my wife's first time flying since the pandemic, and she's a bit anxious." Genevieve swallowed, desperate to show contrition. "I'll do everything I can to make it comfortable," she said softly, then retreated to the galley to regain her composure. Her heart pounded. She had apologized, but was that enough to salvage her professional standing? Terence had warned them all about how crucial it was to impress Alexander Knight. What if he filed a complaint? The thought made Genevieve's pulse spike. The remainder of the flight took on a strange atmosphere. Genevieve noticed Terence periodically checking in on the Knights. Meanwhile, the couple mostly kept to themselves, with Mia occasionally leaning on Alexander's shoulder and letting out a tired sigh. The seatbelt sign came on and off with the usual mid-route bumps, and Genevieve performed her duties with forced politeness, though an undercurrent of anxiety gnawed at her. Adam, one of the attendants, whispered in passing, "You okay, Jen? You look worried." She only managed a half-hearted shrug. They were all aware that first-class service had to be pristine, especially with such an important passenger. The unwritten rule was, if you displease the CEO or the board, expect to face serious repercussions. And here she was, having upset the CEO's wife. At one point, Fiona told Genevieve that Mia had asked for some green tea to ease her nerves. Genevieve volunteered to deliver it as a sign of goodwill. She carefully arranged a cup with a saucer, a small honey packet, and a lemon slice. Taking a steadying breath, she approached the knights. "Miss S. Knight," she began, "here's the green tea you requested. I added a bit of lemon and honey in case you." As she held out the saucer, a sudden tremor of turbulence shook the plane. The cup jittered, spilling hot tea onto the tray table. Mia yelped, recoiling. Genevieve's face went pale with horror. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, setting the half-empty cup on the tray. Luckily, the liquid only splashed the table's surface, not Mia's lap, but it was enough to intensify the awkwardness. Mia dabbed at the spill with a napkin, her voice quavering. "It's all right. Accidents happen." Yet Genevieve saw the frustration in Alexander's eyes. She apologized again and fled to the galley. This day was rapidly becoming her worst in recent memory. Finally, as the flight descended toward LAX, Genevieve felt a slight sense of relief. The seatbelt sign was illuminated one last time. She listened to the hum of the engine's shift as the pilot lowered the flaps. She hoped the matter might quietly end if the knights simply disembarked and moved on with their day. But fate had other plans. 10 minutes before landing, Mia rose from her seat, looking visibly distressed. She gestured to Alexander, who tried to guide her back, but Mia shook her head. Apparently, she needed the lavatory urgently, anxiety or no. Genevieve, seated in the jump seat for landing protocol, saw the entire exchange. She knew that, per FAA regulations, passengers had to remain seated with belts fastened during final descent. She felt torn between enforcing the rule and wanting to avoid further conflict with the knights. Terence was strapped in near the front, so he couldn't intervene. Genevieve forced herself up, ignoring the sting in her ankle. "Miss S. Knight," she called, voice carrying over the engine noise. "I'm sorry, but you must remain seated. We're almost on the ground. It's policy." Mia shot her a pleading look. I can't. It's an emergency," she stammered. Her face had gone pale, and beads of perspiration dotted her forehead. Against better judgment, Genevieve's protective instincts flared. "I understand, but it's highly dangerous right now. If I let you stand, you could be hurt if the plane lurches." Her tone, though concerned, came out with an edge of authority. "Please, ma'am, sit down, or I'll be forced to notify the captain." She was, in effect, threatening a passenger with removal, albeit after landing for failing to comply with safety procedures. Mia's expression changed from desperation to shock. A ripple of tension tore through the cabin. Alexander stood as well, shooting Genevieve a reproachful glare. "She has a medical issue," he said. "Is there nothing you can do?" But the flight was now mere minutes from touchdown. From Genevieve's vantage, letting Mia run to the lavatory was unthinkably risky. As the wheels made contact with the runway, the jolt forced Mia to grab the seat in front of her. Genevieve moved to help, but the sudden motion jerked her off balance. By the time the plane slowed and taxied, Mia was trembling. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, she practically sprinted to the lavatory, ignoring Genevieve's attempts to stop her. The frustration that had built all flight now surged within Genevieve. In the hush following touchdown, many first-class passengers watched this drama unfold. A few murmured about how the flight attendant was really letting her have it, and how the woman clearly needed the lavatory. Genevieve felt their eyes on her like needles. She was following protocol, but the optics were terrible. The door to the lavatory clicked shut. Alexander gave Genevieve a look of simmering anger. "I'll be speaking to your supervisor." This entire flight has been a nightmare for my wife. She has a medical condition that flares under stress, and your lack of empathy is inexcusable." Before she could respond, Terence strode down the aisle, ordering passengers to collect belongings and exit. He looked to Genevieve for an explanation, but she only shook her head, close to tears. It was as though a slow-motion disaster was unfolding, culminating in this single humiliating moment. And she realized, with cold clarity, that she had effectively threatened to have the CEO's wife removed from the plane for ignoring seatbelt instructions someone the airline had explicitly told them to treat with extraordinary care. When Mia finally emerged, face pale but composed, Alexander took her arm and guided her out of the aircraft. Terence tried to offer a conciliatory goodbye, but the knights brushed past him, wordless. At the threshold, Alexander paused, looked back at Genevieve with the kind of disappointment one might reserve for a broken promise, then left. Genevieve stood frozen. Nearby, Fiona and Adam wore expressions of alarm and sympathy, while Terence's features were set in grim resignation. The cabin emptied of the remaining passengers. Outside, terminal agents were preparing for the inbound cleaning crew. Terence approached with measured steps. "Genevieve," he said heavily, "I need a word with you. Now." She followed him off the plane and into the jet bridge, the hush of the corridor feeling ominous. "I've spoken briefly with Mr. Knight," Terence said, voice low. "He is furious. It seems you and Miss S. Knight had multiple conflicts, and from the looks of it, you threatened to have her forcibly seated during final descent. Is that correct?" Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. "I was just following safety protocols. She kept getting up when the seatbelt sign was lit." Her voice broke, recalling her own embarrassment, the toppling, the spilled tea, the seat confusion. But she couldn't ignore that she had also spoken harshly to Mia, multiple times. Terence sighed. "I understand your perspective, but we specifically had instructions to treat the knights with courtesy. I can't shield you if they submit a formal complaint. The CFO of Sky Pacific was on the phone with me just now. Alexander Knight isn't just any board member. He's the majority shareholder's right-hand man. He's basically the next in line to become the face of Sky Pacific." The weight of Terence's words slammed Genevieve's heart. She sensed her career teetering on a knife's edge. Genevieve limped into the crew lounge at LAX with shoulders hunched. In the lounge, a few flight attendants from other routes chatted cheerfully, oblivious to her crisis. She sank into a chair, leaning her head against the cool metal locker. Her ankle throbbed, but it was overshadowed by the pounding in her head. Terence said he would file an incident report once he gathered statements from the entire crew. "I have to be fair," he explained. "If you truly mishandled the situation, we can't brush it under the rug." His tone implied he believed she was in the wrong. Adam and Fiona were likely to confirm that she'd been tense, though they might also mention the turbulence and her ankle injury. Genevieve was certain Alexander Knight would recount every slight with lethal precision. She couldn't imagine how the CEO's wife felt. Mia Knight had looked so anxious, like she was genuinely scared of flying, and Genevieve's attitude must have amplified her stress. Her stomach churned with guilt. She rummaged for her phone. Multiple missed calls from her mother and landlord blinked on the screen. She set it aside, unwilling to face more negativity. A text from an unknown number startled her. It read, "Report to la corporate office, 3 p.m. mandatory." Genevieve stared at it in dread. She recognized the format as official communication from Sky Pacific's HR system. Word traveled fast. She had barely set foot off the plane, and already the higher-ups wanted to see her. At 3 p.m. sharp, Genevieve entered the towering office building adjacent to LAX that housed Sky Pacific's West Coast corporate division. She followed a hallway of tinted glass walls and sleek furniture until she reached a conference room. 2 HR representatives sat inside, joined by a stern-faced woman wearing a navy suit. A badge on her jacket read, A. Martinez, VP of In-Flight Services. Miss Davis, the VP said, motioning to a seat. The dryness in her tone left no room for pleasantries. The HR reps busily tapped on their tablets. I assume you know why you're here. Genevieve took a seat, clasping her hands to keep them from trembling. Yes, ma'am. Miss Martinez cut right to the point. We received a direct complaint from Mr. Alexander Knight regarding the treatment of his wife, Mia Knight, during flight 789 from JFK to LAX. He states that you repeatedly dismissed or belittled her requests, displayed an unprofessional attitude, and threatened to remove her from the flight for non-compliance, despite her attempting to address a genuine medical need. Genevieve's throat constricted. I never intended to belittle her. There was turbulence. Safety protocols. We have statements from other crew members, the VP interrupted, confirming that you were curt, if not outright rude, on multiple occasions, and that you insisted she remain seated even as she disclosed she had a medical issue requiring immediate attention. Genevieve tried to speak, but Miss Martinez raised a hand. Look, we've had no complaints about you in the past. Your record is clean. But this is a high-profile matter, Miss Davis. Mr. Knight is more than a passenger, he's on our board. This cannot be taken lightly. HR leaned forward, offering an official letter on a Sky Pacific letterhead. Genevieve's eyes flickered with dread as she scanned the text. It was a notice of suspension pending further investigation. Tears stung Genevieve's eyes, though she tried to maintain composure. Please, she said, voice shaky, I understand how this looks, but I truly never meant any harm. I was just doing my job, following the FAA rules about seatbelts. Her voice faltered. Miss Martinez's expression was unreadable. Our policy is clear. When a passenger presents a legitimate reason, especially a medical one, we should proceed with caution, courtesy, and empathy. Threatening them with removal is the last resort, not the first. One of the HR reps, a younger woman wearing thick-framed glasses, glanced at Genevieve's file. Your colleagues did mention you twisted your ankle during turbulence and were under considerable stress. That might mitigate the severity of your punishment. We also have records that you tried to apologize to Miss S. Knight. Still, Mr. Knight is demanding accountability. Genevieve absorbed this, half relieved that not all evidence was stacked against her. I'd do anything to make amends, she murmured. I'll attend extra training. I'll apologize personally to Miss S. Knight. I've been a loyal employee for 5 years. Miss Martinez sighed. For now, we have to proceed with suspension. You'll relinquish your flight privileges, pending a review by the disciplinary committee next week. She collected the documents. We'll notify you of the hearing date. At that time, you can present your case. With that, the meeting ended. Genevieve was left feeling hollow, clutching her notice of suspension like a death warrant. Outside the glass walls, the sun was dipping low over the horizon, and she couldn't help but think that her career might be setting too. Over the next several days, Genevieve remained in Los Angeles, too distraught to return home. She rented a small room near the airport, using some emergency savings. Her ankle, still swollen, served as a constant reminder of her fall and the subsequent chain of calamities. She replayed every moment with Mia Knight, from the seat assignment fiasco to the final confrontation over seatbelt compliance. If only she had recognized Monsieur Knight from the start. If only she had shown more empathy. If only she had allowed Mia to slip to the lavatory just before landing. Any one of these changes might have salvaged the situation. She tried calling Terence, but all he could say was that the hearing would decide her fate. Meanwhile, her mother's messages grew increasingly frantic, lamenting Genevieve's sudden radio silence. She eventually called home, explaining she might lose her job, and her mother urged her to come home. But home is in New York, Genevieve thought, and the hearing is here in LA next week. She felt stuck in limbo, unsure if she even had a future with Sky Pacific. At night, Genevieve scrolled through social media, seeing pictures of flight attendants from other airlines living vibrant, carefree lives. She grimaced at a memory. Once, she had posted a quote about loving the sky more than the ground. Now, she wasn't sure if she'd ever wear that uniform again. The day before her scheduled disciplinary hearing, Genevieve was in the hotel lobby, sipping cheap coffee and staring into space, when a man in a blazer approached, calling her name. She recognized him as Andrew Haynes, one of Sky Pacific's corporate liaisons. "Miss Davis, may I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, voice polite but urgent. Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Genevieve followed him to a quieter seating area. Andrew set down a slim folder. "I've been asked to relay a message," he began. "Mr. Alexander Knight received a formal apology from you via email. He acknowledges it. However, his wife, Mia, has expressed interest in speaking with you directly." Genevieve's heart pounded. "She wants to speak with me? Why?" Andrew offered a small smile. "It seems she feels partially responsible for the escalation. She was anxious, perhaps didn't communicate her condition properly, and she wants to clarify. Mr. Knight has arranged for you to meet her privately before the hearing if you agree." Shock coursed through Genevieve. She had expected the Knights to wash their hands of her entirely. "Yes, absolutely. When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The Knights have a suite at the Los Angeles Airport Marriott. She'll be there. Mr. Knight will likely join at some point, but it's primarily Miss S. Knight who wants this meeting." A swirl of emotions, fear, relief, hope, flooded Genevieve's mind. She thanked Andrew, who gave her the sweet details, and left. That night, she hardly slept, rehearsing what she would say to Mia, hoping this could be a chance for redemption. At 8:55 a.m., Genevieve stood outside a plush suite on the 14th floor of the Marriott, heart-hammering. She smoothed her skirt and knocked. The door opened to reveal Mia Knight, wearing a casual blouse and jeans, her eyes warm but tentative. "Please, come in," Mia said quietly. The living area of the suite was bright with morning sun. A small table held a pot of chamomile tea, which Mia gestured toward. "I wasn't sure if you liked tea, but I thought it would be nice to have some," she said, almost shyly. "Thank you," Genevieve replied, taking a seat. For a moment, they just looked at each other. In the bright light, Genevieve saw the faint lines of stress on Mia's face and realized that under different circumstances, they might have gotten along well. Finally, Mia sighed. "I'm sorry our flight became so hostile. My anxiety got the better of me, and I know your job can be stressful. I should have explained more clearly that I have a bladder condition tied to my anxiety. That's why I needed to move around even during turbulence." Genevieve swallowed. "I'm the one who should apologize. I was rude and impatient, and I can't excuse that. The seat mixed up my personal stress, and the turbulence, it all got to me. I regret every harsh word." Mia nodded. "I can accept that. Look, I never wanted to cause trouble. When I told Alexander what happened, I didn't realize it would become such a big complaint. He's very protective. Once he learned how upset I was, he felt compelled to file a formal grievance." Tears pricked Genevieve's eyes. "I'm suspended, pending tomorrow's hearing. I might lose everything. Flying is my passion." Mia's face softened. "I told Alexander last night that I don't want this to ruin someone's life. I'm not vindictive. He is scheduled to attend the hearing too. Let's see if we can work out a more forgiving resolution." They spoke for nearly an hour, sipping tea as they traded perspectives. Genevieve revealed how a chain of personal crises had eroded her usual patience, culminating in the meltdown at 35,000 feet. Mia empathized, sharing that her own mother had recently passed away, which worsened her anxiety. The conversation felt surprisingly cathartic, bridging the gulf of misunderstanding that had formed in the skies. Eventually, Alexander Knight arrived. Genevieve braced herself for hostility, but he greeted her politely, though with a guarded air. Mia took his arm, explaining that she and Genevieve had reached an understanding. She apologized, and we had a good talk, Mia said. I don't think she should lose her job over this. Alexander's hard expression softened slightly. He looked at Genevieve with measured caution. I appreciate your sincerity. If Mia believes you, then I do too. But there is still the matter of protocol. You threatened to remove a passenger who had a legitimate medical need. Genevieve nodded, her voice steady. I did. It was a mistake, but it stemmed from genuine concern for safety. I should have been more empathetic and flexible. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. Let's handle this tomorrow at the hearing. I'm prepared to recommend a different course of action than termination, extra training, probation, something along those lines, provided you accept responsibility publicly. Relief flooded Genevieve. Thank you, she whispered. Their conversation ended on a cautious yet hopeful note. As Genevieve left the suite, Mia offered a gentle smile. Safe travels, Miss Davis, she said softly. The next morning, Genevieve dressed in her best business attire and entered the corporate office's hearing room with renewed resolve. Miss Martinez was there, along with Terence, the HR representatives, and a few executives. Alexander Knight arrived with Mia by his side, causing a stir of whispers among the staff. Everyone knew who he was. Seeing him at a disciplinary hearing was extraordinary. After opening remarks, the committee reviewed the complaints and asked Genevieve for a statement. Her voice trembled, but she laid out the facts honestly. She admitted her faults, citing that while she never intended malice, she had failed to handle the situation with the required empathy. Then it was Mia's turn. She spoke calmly, explaining her condition and how the stress of the flight had exacerbated it. However, she concluded, I also contributed to the misunderstanding by not communicating properly at first. Miss Davis apologized and showed genuine regret. I believe she deserves another chance. Alexander backed up his wife's testimony. We don't want someone's career destroyed over a single day's tension. We do believe, however, there should be some remedial steps to ensure such an incident doesn't happen again. We trust Miss Davis is capable of learning from this. Miss Martinez and the committee conferred privately. At last, they announced their decision. Genevieve would be reinstated, but demoted for 6 months to a less demanding flight schedule, subject to a retraining program. She'd lose some privileges and pay, but she would not be terminated. Relief washed over Genevieve like a warm tide. She thanked the committee, then turned to thank Mia and Alexander, who offered her a small, encouraging smile in return. The hearing concluded, and as they parted ways, Genevieve felt a surge of gratitude for the surprising compassion they had shown. She had received immediate karma on that flight, but now she felt she'd also been granted a rare second chance. Over the following weeks, Genevieve tackled her retraining with renewed dedication. She made a point to approach every passenger encounter with empathy, recalling how easily misunderstandings could escalate. Her ankle eventually healed, as did the bruises to her ego. A final footnote arrived via a personal note from Mia Knight, thanking her for the honest conversation at the Marriott and wishing her luck in future flights. It ended with a simple line, remember, each of us is carrying unseen burdens. A bit of kindness can go a long way. Genevieve kept that note tucked in her flight jacket, a tangible reminder of the lesson she had almost lost everything to learn. Thank you for tuning in to this tense and emotional story of a flight attendant whose rigid adherence to rules and a dash of bad luck nearly ended her career. If you found yourself absorbed by this tale, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing it with friends who appreciate dramatic twists and real-life lessons. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more stories that blend suspense with heartfelt morals, proving that sometimes a single moment can change everything. Your viewership fuels our commitment to creating engaging narratives that inspire empathy, reflection, and perhaps even second chances. Until next time, travel safely and treat others with kindness.